In this lesson, we'll take a look at some ways of moving and transforming our geometry around our canvas. So as we start to work with geometry, we're going to want to probably move it around. Maybe not our base character, but maybe some of the other elements that are associated with it. Or if we're creating a scene, there'll be a lot of objects that we want to sort of move, rotate, or scale around on our canvas. So there are different ways to do this. The first way that I'm going to look at is going to be kind of maybe a little bit odd. So what we want to do is go right next to Draw. We want to stay in edit mode, but we want to choose Move, Scale, or Rotate. And that's going to bring up a special tool. And we want to make sure that we've got this converted to a poly mesh. I'm going to choose Move. You can see that the hotkeys for those are W, E, and R. So I've chosen Move, and I get this weird little line. Now, if you don't have one, click on part of your model and draw it out. And you'll see this line with 3 circles, all these little ticks, and then we've got little lines over here. It looks really complicated for just moving our object around. This is our action line or our transpose line. And what we can do is by clicking on different parts of this, we can do different things. And so we've got Move selected. So if I just want to kind of move this around, I can click on this center circle and just click and drag to move it around. If I select the end circle here, I can actually stretch this geometry out. Or if I click on the base one, I can actually kind of cut this down a little bit, which is kind of cool. All right, I can also change the orientation very quickly by clicking on these little axes here. If I want to move it in a particular direction, I can hold down Shift while I click on that center circle. Okay, so we can move things around that way. Now, at any time, you can click out a new transpose line and use that one as well. Okay, and depending on where you click and where you end, you can work with it in different ways. So if you wanted to stretch it, you would choose where you wanted to stretch it from, and then the point that it would stretch from. So you're kind of setting temporary pivots here in how you're dealing with it. Now, when we just move it around as a whole, it doesn't really make all that much difference. So you can really draw it out wherever you want to have it. Okay, if you're going to be just clicking on that center line, or center circle rather. Now we can also choose to scale our 3D objects. And so it's going to use the Move, Scale, and Rotate is going to use the exact same line. So you don't have to draw it out again if you don't want to. But just keep in mind, you're going to be using the position of these as your different pivots. So if I come in here and select the end circle, it's going to scale this uniformly, which is cool. It's kind of what I would want a lot of times. I can also click on the center line, and it's going to scale it non-uniformly, which may be something that you want. Okay, and then I can click on the end, and it'll scale it uniformly there. But you can see that it's scaling it based on the other end as far as the pivot goes. So I could come in here, and the center of that scale is going to be wherever that base is drawn out. Okay, so we can scale things out, go back, move them around, again using the same line, which can be drawn out at any time between the transforms that we're doing to it. Okay, we can also rotate it, and so rotate, the pivot point becomes very important because I can draw this out here, and I started at this point. So if I click on this end circle, I can rotate around that initial drop point. If I wanted to rotate it from here, I could rotate it from there. So a really nice way of just having a temporary pivot wherever we want to place it. Okay, now I can also come in and draw a line kind of going along in this direction, and then if I click on that center, it'll sort of rotate it along that transposed line there. And then I can rotate it this way as well. All right, so that's one way of moving, scaling, or rotating. It is a little odd at first. You can always just draw this back out, and just keep in mind that it's based on the pivot point for your base, and then you can do different things based on the circle that you actually use. And if you want to go back and start sculpting, we just go back to Draw, and then you can begin sculpting that way. There is a couple of other ways that we can move things around. We could go in here in the tool palette under Deformation, and we can actually use our offset. And you'll notice all these little XYZs here. The highlighted ones are the axis that we're using. So if I wanted to move this straight up, I would move it in the Y. So I'd select Y, and I could offset it that way. Now it looks kind of odd because the floor is moving along with it. If we had another object in here, you'd be able to see it move a little bit more. We can also rotate this, and there you can see the floor kind of moving along to be wherever the bottom of that object is. Okay, so I don't really think of this as moving the object in 3D space. It's just giving us a nice floor for that base. Now if we had multiple tools in here together, then it would look a little bit different. So we can offset it, which would be similar to move. We could rotate it, which is the same, and we could change the size here, which would be similar to scaling it. So we could come in here, and if we have X, Y, and Z selected, it would change the size uniformly versus coming in here and say, okay, I only want to scale it in the Y. So deformation subpalette here would be good for that. Also, under geometry, you could come in under position and size and start to modify it in there as well, and that can keep track of those values, whereas some of these other ones, you don't really have a value that's being created that you can go back in and zero out or really refine numerically. Okay, so to make sure that you have your object, so it's not a primitive, and see if I draw out a primitive sphere here. We've got initialize, we've got that drawn out, and I want to kind of move it around. I'm not using that transpose line. I'd have to come in and make it a poly mesh and then go to move, and now I can move it, scale it, or rotate it using that transpose line. Okay, so let's go ahead in the next lesson and take a look at the some different display options for our geometry. So we'll actually create something that we can use in our project. Up to now, we've kind of been using these simple objects. We'll again use a simple object, but it'll be something we can take through this project and start to create a piece of our overall project for the entire group of courses here that we're looking at. So we'll go ahead and take a look at different ways to display our geometry in the next lesson.